Good evening, everyone. Hi, my name is Bobby Saperstein, and as the Director of Program and Strategy for the Jewish Democratic Council of America, JDCA, I want to welcome you to today's 2022 midterm elections reflection and celebration, and the kickoff of our Georgia runoff election efforts in support of Senator Raphael Warnock. Thanks to you, JDCA mobilized thousands of Jewish Dems from across the country to make more than 1.5 million direct voter contacts. Our JDCA PAC ads were viewed more than 48 million times, and so far, 77 of our endorsed candidates have won. That, and considering that 74% of Jewish Americans voted for Democrats in the midterms, there's a lot to celebrate. So whether you phone banked, text banked, and or generously gave of your time or financial resources, thank you. Thank you for being a part of our Jewish Dems movement. We at JDCA, we're so grateful for your support and partnership, and simply put, we couldn't have done this without you. Tonight, we tip our hats to each of you, and we celebrate our hard-fought victories. We accept what didn't go quite our way and learn for the future. And we gear up to re-elect Senator Warnock in Georgia with our first official phone bank of the runoff season. To begin tonight's program, I'm delighted to introduce our guest, political commentator Brian Tyler Cohen, to talk to us about his experience covering the 2022 midterms. Brian is among the most watched progressive political commentators in America, with work featured on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, at least for now. Brian is also host of one of the top-ranked political podcasts in the US, No Lie, with Brian Tyler Cohen, with recent guests which include President Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, and Ron Klain, to name but a few. Brian, thank you so much for being a great friend of JDCA and for joining us tonight.
Thanks.
Now, before I hand things over to Brian and our CEO, Haley Soifer, to begin the conversation, there will be time for audience questions. So please post your questions to me in the chat, and we'll do our best to get to all of them. And with that, I'm delighted to turn things over to Haley. Haley?
Thanks so much, Bobby, and thanks to everyone for joining us. A huge thanks to the hundreds of you who joined us for our more than 80 election events. We put in so much effort to phone banking and text banking on behalf of Democrats around the country, and we succeeded. So we are really happy to celebrate with all of you tonight, and now, of course, turn our sights onto Georgia. We are very lucky to be joined by Brian Tyler Cohen. As Bobby said, he is quite the influencer, and it's fun tonight for us because normally for those who follow Brian, he's interviewing. So it's fun that we get to interview him tonight and hear his insights. So Brian, I'm going to start off by asking you a few questions.
Sure,
so this year, you interviewed President Biden, Vice President Harris, White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain, and countless Democratic elected officials and candidates in the lead up to the midterms. We watched your interviews and your efforts to advance our shared values of defending democracy, protecting abortion rights, and combating and calling out right-wing extremism. So with that in mind, what for you are the key takeaways from this election? And did you see this coming? And why did so many get it wrong? So over to you, Brian.
Thank you. And thank you for having me, by the way. Thank you to Haley and Bobby for the intro, and to all of you for being involved and staying involved right now. I wish, if everyone did what you all do who are watching right now, it would make everybody's lives a lot easier. So thank you. As for the takeaways, here's what I think. I think that the biggest takeaway is we shouldn't underestimate the strength of issues that we're constantly told that the voters don't care about, because we've seen now that they do. So we were told so many times that voters don't care about democracy, that the issue of protecting democracy doesn't work, that they don't care about the issue of abortion rights, they don't care about our lifelong investment into Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, because when push comes to shove, when it was time for the voters to show up on behalf of those issues, that's exactly what they did. So I think that we're constantly being told by the right and by forces in the media that that's actually not what Americans care about. They're all just, everybody is just in the middle and focused on kitchen table issues. But we can see now that these issues that are important to us are also important to the vast majority of Americans out there. And yet again, we came into this election cycle underdogs, and because of those issues, they were able to deliver major wins for Democrats. Another takeaway is that extremism doesn't work. Republicans have persevered for a long time under the pretense that they won't be held accountable, and figured because of that they can just run on the biggest rollback of rights in modern American history. And I think something that we've seen now is that they were dead wrong. So that's been the trajectory of that party, that they can just continue to nominate extremists, that maybe they would be, because they have splashy extremists on their side, the Marjorie Taylor Greenes, the Lauren Boeberts, the Donald Trumps, and that's who brings in some money and that's who riles up the base, that should be what they do party wide. And so that's exactly who they nominated. They allowed Donald Trump and those far right forces in their party to elevate these people through the primaries. And every single election denier who ran for governor, every single election denier who ran for Secretary of State, in every single one of these battleground states lost from top to bottom. So extremism doesn't work, and it's not like Americans just aren't paying attention, which has been the prevailing notion thus far, that people don't pay attention, you can do whatever you want, and there's not going to be any accountability. That's not the case. As for what I saw coming, look, I would love to say that, yeah, I saw this coming. It was hard leading up to this. I was filled with a lot of dread, and the reason that I was filled with a lot of dread was because Republicans were running basically a campaign predicated on election denialism and anti-democracy. And I knew that if they had won this election running on those things, that would validate that strategy moving forward, and that's what the entire party would be about moving forward. And so not only would they head into 2024 continuing to run on election denialism and attacks against democracy, but all of the people who would have won those races would be in place to actually help perpetuate exactly that. So there was a lot of dread moving forward, like as we headed into this midterm cycle. So I don't know that I could say that I expected Democrats to retain control of the Senate and just keep Republican wins in the House to a handful, but I'm glad they did. What I did see coming is that people recognize that extremism, and it's what I hammered away at every single day. It's what I heard people saying constantly when they would comment on videos, when I would talk to them in person. Even those people who don't pay attention to politics, and I speak to a lot of them. Most of my family is that way. They knew about Republican efforts to ban abortion. They knew about Republican efforts to ban Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, to ban voting, to ban drop boxes, to ban books, to ban acknowledgments of the existence of LGBT Americans. So they were paying attention, and they recognized just how extreme that party is. And so while generally people don't pay attention to the intricacies of this stuff, and while I expect that people don't know what's in a certain bill and whatnot, the fact that they knew about this, the fact that my sister, who does not know what a governor does, that's how out of the loop in politics she is, called me and was like, okay, what's happening on these abortion bans? That let me know that people were finally paying attention. That's just how extreme they'd become. As for why I think people got it wrong, this is a little bit about, I've spoken a little bit about this, but it's something that I'm really interested in. I think that a lot of the pundits got it wrong because so often what we consider the mainstream media adopts its framing from the right. I think the mainstream media is so horrified of giving deference to the left because they don't want to be known as the liberal media, and so they overcompensate and overcorrect. And so they'll look for these talking points from right-wing media and figure that if they don't do the whole both sides thing and give deference to what they're saying on the right, that they'll be maligned as the liberal media. Now, forget the fact that they're maligned as the liberal media regardless. But I still think that, if these Republicans will say something, they'll pick it up anyway, so that they can at least, let them give themselves a pat on the back, to let themselves think that they're being fair or being neutral or giving deference to both sides. But I think that, we know of a lot of Republican efforts to flood the zone with Republican heavy polls, that had a big influence on how people perceived the lead up to this midterm cycle. I think it's important moving forward to constantly like recalibrate and recognize that these people are not acting in good faith, that you can't take what they say at face value if they're operating from a place of just abject partisanship. And so I do hope that we see some changes in terms of like how the media gathers its talking points and presents them to people, because a lot of what we heard in the lead up to this midterm cycle is the result of exactly that right-wing framing.
Thank you. Brian, you have consistently been speaking truth to power by generating content that calls out Republican hypocrisy, whether it's on defending democracy, defending abortion rights, and combating extremism, including the rise of anti-Semitism. You spoke a few times, I think, with our mutual friend, Michigan State Senator Mallory McMurrow, who has been a leading voice in rejecting Republican extremism and led an effort that was successful in flipping that state Senate from red to blue for the first time in decades in Michigan. And we saw across the board, up and down the ballot in Michigan, my home state, Democratic wins. How can Democrats replicate what took place in Michigan? And I remember well that Trump won that state by just 10,400 votes in 2016. And now that state is blue. But how can we replicate that, this rejection of election denial and extremism and a codification of abortion rights? How can we replicate it in the next election elsewhere?
I think it's twofold. I think one is that Republicans are doing half of the work for us. They're the ones nominating these extremists. And if you look at what's happening today, we've just gotten announcements from Republicans in the House that they are starting up their investigations centered on Hunter Biden. So I think exactly what was rejected at the ballot box is what the remaining Republicans intend to focus on. And so they're doing half the work for us. But aside from that, I think what we can do and what we have to do on our end is to continue just focusing on delivering. And we did a really good job of that in the last 2 years. I mean, with the slimmest of majorities that we have, we passed the Inflation Reduction Act that was record money for climate, that was finally allowed the government to negotiate lower drug prices, healthcare costs capped at $2,000 a year for seniors, insulin capped at $35 a month, making the rich pay their fair share, imposing that 15% corporate minimum tax. The CHIPS Act, in addition to that money from the Inflation Reduction Act, resulted in an avalanche of companies announcing investments in renewable energy, in chip making, in EV batteries, in chips, like I said. So that included LG, Honda, Sparks, First Solar, Micron, Qualcomm. So in addition to Biden obviously making moves to eliminate student loan debt, that's being challenged by Republicans in court, removing convictions for federal marijuana possession. So I think just having Democrats continue to move forward and deliver as much as they can, so that it's not just it doesn't give an opening for Republicans to say, what are these people even doing? There's so much that we can point to and that we were able to do with barely any majority, that I think if you look at what happens in these states, I mean, for a place like Michigan now, they finally have Democratic majorities for the first time in 40 years. So they'll be able to do that. My advice would be to deliver as much as you possibly can, to deliver on reproductive rights and renewable energy and gun safety reforms and healthcare. It seems like that's exactly what they intend on doing. But I would just say, to basically prevent Republicans from being able to make this argument that it's scary when Democrats take office. That's a lot of what they rely on is just naked fear mongering. That it's scary when Democrats take office. That in fact, when Democrats take office, like they've done for decades prior to this, it's the Democrats who lift the country out of recessions that are caused by Republicans. It's Democrats who create more jobs than Republicans do, and that have done in the last, 3 decades. It's Democrats who make sure that there are more people in this country that have access to health care. So I think as long as they do that, we'll be in good shape, and we'll have the tools that we need so that when we move forward, we can actually point to these things and keep people engaged. And you have a new generation of kids out there who recognize that, okay, one party is looking to do nothing or to coddle the gun manufacturers, while you have other parties that are looking to pass the gun safety package, like the one that we passed, where all of a sudden, for the first time in 3 decades, we are funding red flag laws in the states and expanding background checks for 18 to 20-year-olds and blocking domestic abusers from owning a gun. So I think the name of the game here is going to be just continuing to build on that progress and actually delivering where we can.
So we are celebrating these wins tonight, but we've also already turned our focus and our attention and our efforts to the runoff election in Georgia. As we look at what happened in the midterms, it's clear that the statewide margins of victory for Democrats in states like Arizona and Nevada are smaller than the size of not just the Jewish electorate, but the Jewish Democratic electorate, meaning the Jewish vote helped to deliver critical victories for Democrats like Katie Hobbs in Arizona and Senator Cortez Masto in Nevada. The same is likely to be true in Georgia on December 6th. And we're doing everything we can to ensure that Senator Warnock wins this runoff. What is it going to take for him to win? And how important is this 51st seat now that Democrats have held their majority in the Senate?
Yeah, so I think making it clear to people why this race is important, why 51 is more important than 50, is going to be instrumental in making sure that there's no apathy. I spoke with Senator Gary Peters, who's the head of the DSCC, this morning for an interview that's coming out this weekend, but asked him exactly this. And I think the most important, there's 3 things that I think are most important in terms of why 51 is going to be a lot more important than 50, even though we'll have control of the Senate either way. The first is that with this 50-50 split, the Senate has basically a sharing agreement between both parties. And so without needing to do that sharing agreement, we'll be able to allow for a faster pace of judicial confirmations. Obviously, the judges are super important. We recognize that about 10 years later than the Republicans did. But if we've ever recognized how important it is, it's now in the aftermath of the Dobbs ruling. So it'll allow us for a faster pace of these judicial confirmations, which is important because we need as many 35-year-old judges as we can possibly fit onto the bench, people who are healthy and ride their bike every day and eat really well so that they can spend the next 60 years on that bench. The second is that we have, and this is like such a terrible thing to think about in the immediate aftermath of this election, but looking forward to 2024, we have a pretty brutal Senate map. We're defending seats in Arizona, Nevada, West Virginia, Ohio, Montana, and our best pickup opportunities, I believe, are in Texas and Florida, to give you an indication of just how things are looking on that map. So we need as much of a cushion as we could possibly get. That's why this seat will allow us that kind of buffer if we're able to get it, in case we do end up losing a seat like the one in Montana, like the one in West Virginia. And of course, we'll all be defending Joe Manchin like we always have, heading into 2024. The hero of the Democratic Party, Joe Manchin. The last reason I think is like one of the most important. It's that just generally for our own mental health, for our own like just for humanity, I think if you just compare a person like Raphael Warnock and a person like Herschel Walker and how important it is to keep people in power and to like reward people like Raphael Warnock, who's not only been relentlessly focused on helping his state, but is just a good person. And you compare that with someone like Herschel Walker, who look, I'm sure is a great football player, but the guy is not qualified, not qualified for the Senate. I'll say that as diplomatically as possible. I mean, this is somebody who has just trouble like stringing a few words together to form a sentence. So I think that the difference between the two is as clear as it gets. But just rewarding someone like Raphael Warnock and keeping someone like that in power, whose sole priority is just helping his constituents and helping the people of the state, and I think just kind of restoring a little sense of faith in our humanity in terms of making sure that people like that stay in a position of power where they can do the most good, as opposed to not showing up and letting that seat fall by the wayside.
Great, and I'm gonna do 2 plugs now, 2 shameless plugs. So if you want to join JDCA and JDCA PAC in ensuring that Warnock wins, we're going to be phone banking, text banking after this, and we're going to continue doing it through December 6th. So please stay on and join those efforts. We're also going to put a link in the chat for our PAC efforts, including digital advertising and other efforts to get out the vote for Warnock. You also mentioned that you interview Gary Peters. So does that mean that that's your Sunday podcast?
That's my next one coming up.
Okay, well, Brian's podcast is awesome. So you guys need to listen to that if you don't already. It's on Sundays. Okay, so 2 questions about headlines. Today, obviously, the Speaker Pelosi announced that she is passing on the gavel to the next generation. Unfortunately, it won't be a gavel, but passing on the leadership to the next generation. I want your take on that. Also, and what it means for the Democratic Party. And then also, of course, earlier this week, our twice impeached, soon to be indicted former president said that he is beginning to, he launched his presidential campaign. How do you plan on covering that? And what mistakes could we learn from the way he's been covered in the past in 16 and 20?
Yeah, so all great questions. I think with regard to the first batch, my thoughts on Speaker Pelosi leaving her leadership position. I think that, we often look at someone like Mitch McConnell and recognize how effective he is on the right. Nancy Pelosi is that on the left. She is, without all the terrible stuff that Mitch McConnell brings, but Nancy Pelosi is as effective a speaker as we've ever had and will ever have in the Democratic Party. I mean, to be able to wrangle a caucus that spans from the Josh Gottheimers out there all the way to the squad AOC is remarkably impressive. She was able to do it pretty much without any defection for the entire time that she was there. And if people don't really recognize that's a testament to the fact that she's done her job. We've passed every bit of legislation that has come up for votes. That's a testament to her. So it's a big it's a major loss for the party, but at the same time, hopefully she'll be there to guide the next person through and to make sure that they know her tricks of the trade. But second is it's a good thing in terms of a generational shift for party leadership, and I believe that we'll probably see the next round of leaders. It looks like she's put her weight behind Hakeem Jeffries. I'm not sure who it's ultimately going to be, but in any case, the next slate of people who are running for leadership are about 30 years younger, and so I think that's a good thing in terms of being able to relate a little more closely to the party whose support is largely based off of younger folks. So I think that's going to be a good thing, even though we are losing a giant in Nancy Pelosi in leadership. As for Trump, so I come from this whole wave of people who rose up in the Trump era. That's when I started. I tweeted as soon as he announced. I tweeted basically the context that I thought that when you talk about Trump should be included. So I basically tweeted Donald Trump, who is twice impeached and whose last act in office was to incite an insurrection against the U.S. Capitol to try to corruptly retain power, is running for president again. I think this context is going to be important. I think that anytime we talk about him, it's important to include that historical context, and that the media should not act as stenographers for him. Just about everything he says is going to be an abject lie, and I think that there is so much that we can do in terms of bringing that context in and making sure that people know while he's saying it, why it's untrue, why something is a lie, and not just waiting until 6 hours later for the fact check when nobody's watching anymore, when no one's consuming that stuff anymore. I think all of this stuff is going to be important to rebut what he says immediately. But with that said, because a lot of people, especially on the right, are going to watch this stuff and hear what he says and disregard what fact checkers and what the media has to say more broadly, is just not to be so thirsty when we do cover him, and not to do it so relentlessly. We don't need to hear everything. Every errant, we don't need to sit around and wait while some errant synapse fires in his brain and a collection of unintelligible words fall out of his face. It's not that interesting. one advantage that he had running in 2016 is that everything he said in the political space was brand new and exciting and sexy for politics. He's always been a one-trick pony, and while that was interesting and new and novel in 2016, he hasn't changed because this is who he's always been. It was new for us, but not new for him. He's still the same guy. He's still out there railing against windmills and light bulbs and toilet flushes and saying the same thing basically that he did in 2016. We're all able to see through that now. It's not that interesting, and I think that people are starting to recognize that. That's why you hear more and more about like how he's low energy. I mean, it's the same speech recycled about 10,000 times. So I think there's going to be a little built-in insulation from all of the wall-to-wall coverage that we saw prior. But I think just generally, what I think generally what we should let me see how I want to phrase this. I think generally, yeah, I mean that pretty much covers it. I think that that we shouldn't that we should make sure to give the context that's necessary and to not just assume that because he was exciting in 2016 that he's going to give any more interesting information that we haven't heard now.
Yeah, and speaking of recycling the same speech, he's going to be speaking again at the Republican Jewish Coalition convention, whatever they're doing this weekend in Las Vegas. And every time he's spoken there, he has said anti-Semitic things. So we can expect more of the same, I'm sure, from him. Okay, I'm going to transition now to the audience Q&A. And for those who didn't see, use the chat to put your questions for Brian in the chat, and I'm going to try to aggregate some of them and ask as many as we can. Brandon Teague asked about the younger voters in this election who turned out. I mean, they turned out in 20, they turned out in 18, they turned out in this election. It made the difference. And not just younger voters in a general sense, 40 and under, 29 and under turned out. What did you see in terms of the youth vote, the younger vote in this election? And how can we sustain that momentum going into 2024? Because they're overwhelmingly supporting Democrats.
Yeah, so I think first of all, I think a lot of credit. They deserve a lot of credit because they're able to decipher, they're able to wade through a lot of the bullshit that stops other people up. Like, I think that because they have a much better ability to discern what's real and what's not real online, I think that they can, and because they're growing up in a generation where they were taught that from the very beginning, they're able to figure out a lot of the stuff that other generations take longer to figure out. So they deserve a lot of credit for being able to sniff out the bullshit before faster than most people. I think another major important thing is going to be to continue to deliver for them. I mean, a lot of progressive and young priorities were going to be eliminating student loan debt, which again, they're working their way through the courts right now, but Republicans have sued to stop those things. But Democrats, at the very least, got caught trying. Work to get to eliminate federal marijuana possession convictions and to take that off the list of Schedule I drugs. That's a major priority for young people. Focusing on climate and continuing to fund climate initiatives and end our reliance on fossil fuels wherever we can. And I think too, like we have to recognize that, and I know I mentioned this in my answer before, but Republicans are doing half of the work in this sense for us, because remember, this is a generation that grew up doing mass shooter drills in schools and watching these 1,000-year storms hit their states and cities every single year. And this isn't how it used to be. I mean, I remember I was living in New Jersey when Hurricane Sandy hit, and that was like the very beginning of these 1,000-year storms that were only supposed to hit every 1,000 years. And all of a sudden we're having 2, 3, 4 of them every year. Climate change is real for this generation. Gun violence is real for this generation. And the Republican Party doesn't seem to have any interest in moving their priorities away from the things that perpetuate those things. So they continue to coddle gun manufacturers. They continue to accept money at like alarming rates from fossil fuel companies. And so they are doing half the work for us. I think it's incumbent on us, on Democrats, to make sure that people know that, because I think Republicans bank on the fact that people aren't paying attention But to continue driving those messages home is going to be the most important thing. And that's a lesson that Democrats can learn from Republicans. And it's something that I've tried to bring in what I do, which is to repeat a lot of this stuff over and over and over again, not just so that everybody hears it, but also because you need to hear it 5 or 6 times before you finally start to internalize it. And then you can repeat it when you've heard it so many times to your circle of people. And Republicans have done that on the campaign trail. I mean, they use "Make America Great Again," "Build the Wall." They have these short and sweet, slogans that they've used, and like while they're ridiculous to us and they're based on just ridiculousness, it's an effective messaging strategy. And so I think that that's something that we can learn from the right in terms of adopting messages and just repeating this stuff so that people can finally start to recognize like that this is our position on the left.
Thanks. And it's great to have you kind of as a spokesperson. I guess you're millennial. For the
Millennial,
millennial,
yeah.
for the
A
millennial
true millennial.
generation.
I don't know the years of a millennial. I know my brother is like born in 1982, and I think they call him a geriatric millennial, which
Oh,
is like
okay, okay.
negates all of the like the coolness of being a millennial. But anyway,
Well,
yeah.
I'm a not as cool Gen Xer, so it's good. It's good to have you as a spokesperson for
Thanks.
the millennials generation. Um, Uh, we have some questions about the losses, which, yes, we are celebrating, and there are many more wins than losses, but there were some painful losses for Democrats and what we can learn about it. So Marcia has asked about Ohio, Florida, and Texas. Karen has repeated similar questions about Texas and Ohio and Wisconsin. And Esther has asked about the 6 House seats that we lost in New York that
Yeah.
cost us the House majority. It's a lot to unpack there. So I'm just gonna, you choose how we can learn from some of these losses and what led to some of these losses, because it's different reasons in different states.
Yeah, so I think something that we have to remember is even though people like Stacey Abrams, people like Beto, people like Tim Ryan ran amazing races in the states that they were in. First of all, this is really tough terrain for them. But second of all, we also have to remember that like them being on the top of the ballot, even though they lost and it feels like just like a total loss on our end, we have to remember how many people down ballot were elevated by virtue of them being on those ballots. So it's a loss in the sense that they lost their races, but I mean, just them being on the ballot, just them going to these towns and cities all across their states, were able to get so many more people involved. And like we'll wait until to see what the numbers actually bear out, but there are a lot of House races that we were able to keep, including ones in these states that were owed, I'm sure, largely to the fact that they had somebody come in a person like Tim Ryan or Stacey Abrams or Beto or on and on, depending, Sherry Beasley in North Carolina. So I think that we have to continue running these people, even if people are running races where they're 10 points back at the beginning and then they lose by 10 points at the end, because again, you don't know how many people are showing up because of that. And I think also you can kind of draw the same lesson in a place like California, for example, where we didn't have a major competitive race at the top of the ticket that could draw people out. And that's the bittersweet part of living in a blue state like California or a blue state like New York, is that when you don't have like a highly contested race at the top of the ballot, you're not going to draw those people out who would otherwise come out to vote for them. But I think like it's still important to run these candidates as well as you can and to donate to these candidates, because that energy, that enthusiasm is still going to bring people out, oftentimes in larger numbers than even states that are reliably blue. And I think if we look at a lot of the states that were contested, like Colorado, which everyone was worried that Michael Bennet was going to lose the Senate, he actually overperformed candidates that were in a number of reliably blue states. So it just goes to show that like having these competitive seats in these competitive battlegrounds, even if they are doomed from the very beginning, is still super helpful to the party and super helpful down ballot. As for New York, so I don't know like the intricacies of New York's politics, but I would imagine that we should probably have some degree of maybe new leadership there if we're looking at just a routing in New York. So I think that the party can't be opposed to just like entrenching the power of the people who are there, and should look at what happened in these previous elections, and if changes need to be made, then as opposed to entrenching, as opposed to digging in our heels, just be more open to making way for new people to take power, and also to look at places like Wisconsin. I mean, Wisconsin's Democratic Party is one of the strongest Democratic parties in the entire country. And they've won, I believe, prior to this election, it was 11 out of 12 statewide races. Obviously, in this one, they were able to win in all of the races except the Tim Ryan race at the top of the ticket. But to see what they've done to take those lessons from places like Wisconsin and try to replicate them, even in blue states like New York, because very clearly we need it. So those are, I think those are some of the takeaways that I have on those issues.
Great. Well, the questions keep coming, and we could keep asking them, but we want to move on to Georgia. So I'm just going to encourage everyone that if you liked hearing from Brian, to watch his podcast, watch his YouTube. Brian, you're all over? Where are you?
Yeah, I think the best place to find me is my podcast is No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, if you listen to podcasts. Otherwise, YouTube is the best place to catch my content. I do my videos, my daily trending story videos on YouTube, and also interviews, like you mentioned before, with everyone from President Biden to Jamie Raskin, who I know is a favorite of you guys,
Absolutely.
a favorite of mine as well. So yeah, that's the best place to find me.
Well, thank you so much, Brian. We are Jewish Dems, and we are proud to claim you as one of our own. We're so happy to consider you a partner and friend, and we're so thrilled to not just have you share your insight with us, but frankly with everyone. We love listening to you. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the work that you guys are doing, and thank everybody here for being involved. I know I mentioned this at the top, but this is what I spend all of my time doing these videos, is just to try to keep people engaged, and that's exactly what you're doing. And this is going to be, what you're doing right now is going to be the difference. So thank you for being, engaged as you are right now.
Thank you, Brian. All right, we are now going to transition to Georgia. And for those of you who are very anxious to start phone and text banking, don't worry, we're going to do that very soon. But first, we're going to lay the groundwork for what's at stake in Georgia. We're going to hear from two folks on the ground in Atlanta. So first, I'm going to introduce JDCA board member and vice chair for management and operations, Michael Rosenzweig, who will tell us what's at stake and introduce our next speaker. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Haley, and thank you, Brian. That was really terrific. Appreciate it very much. So as Haley said, I am speaking to you from Atlanta, Georgia, where once again, as in 2020 and 2021, courtesy of our law in Georgia that requires candidates to win an election by more than 50%, we are the center of the political universe. And we're the center of the political universe because we're about to embark on this runoff. It's not quite as important as it was in 21 because, of course, then control of the Senate was at stake, and we know now that we do have 50 seats. But for the reasons Brian mentioned, I won't go through them again. The 51st seat is actually quite critically important. So, number one, we in Georgia recognize, and we don't want to lose sight of the fact that 51 seats is really, really important. The other thing I want to say about Georgia, though, is that we have a reasonably sizable Jewish community. And as is true of every election in which JDCA gets involved, we have a large enough Jewish community that if properly mobilized, we can make the difference in this election. We've seen this before. We saw it in 2020 and 2021. We've seen it around the country since 2018. What we're in the business of doing is focusing exclusively on Jewish voters. There's no other organization that does that. And we do so in states and in elections in which we know the Jewish vote can make the difference. This is true in Georgia, and it's important that we mobilize the Jewish vote in Georgia, not just to make sure that we have a 51st Democratic senator for the reasons that Brian mentioned, but also because, frankly, this is a choice that is particularly important to Jewish voters. The choice between Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker is not simply the choice, although this is very important, between someone who is intelligent, decent, articulate, a longtime friend, and most particularly in his time in the Senate, a good friend of Israel and the Jewish community, and someone who is none of those things, at least so far as we know. But it's also a choice that allows us to elect someone whom we know will focus in the way that we need our senators to focus on the issues that matter most to us as Jewish voters. We know from polling, and I think everyone on this call knows, that the issues that we care most about are preserving our democracy, preserving women's reproductive rights, and fighting the scourge of anti-Semitism and extremism. We know for sure that Raphael Warnock is exceptionally strong on all of those issues that are of critical importance to Jewish voters. What we also know is that Herschel Walker is tied very closely to Donald Trump. And aside from the fact that Herschel Walker is, for a host of other reasons, unfit to be a senator, the fact that he's tied closely to Donald Trump means that we can't really trust him with respect to the issues that we care most about. We can't trust Herschel Walker to preserve democracy. We can't trust him to fight anti-Semitism. And we certainly cannot trust him to fight for women's reproductive rights. We know enough to know that. We know that this election, as is always true in Georgia, is going to be incredibly close. The general election, as I think you know, Warnock was able to win, but not with more than 50%. He was close, 49.4%. But Walker got 48.5%. So we know this is going to be a close election, and we know that at the end of the day, it's all about turnout. This is what we do best. And the important thing I would want to communicate to everybody on this call is that every single person on this call is in a position actually to make a difference. Because what you do when you text bank and phone bank with JDCA, and for that matter with others, is you ensure that the voters we need to turn out will in fact turn out. So on behalf of JDCA, I want to thank you, but I also want to urge you to understand and take seriously the opportunity and the responsibility that you have. Now, one thing to keep in mind, and this is very important to keep in mind as you talk to folks with whom you phone bank today, is early voting. Early voting is very truncated in Georgia this year. Last time around, when it was Ossoff and Warnock, we had 9 weeks. This time we have only 4 weeks. And because early voting starts in many of the counties here, especially the 4 counties in the Atlanta metropolitan area on November 27th, we're talking about an election that really, for all intents and purposes, is 10 days away. So when you talk to the folks that you call today, one thing that's important to stress is that time is of the essence. We have early voting starting November 27th in Fulton, DeKalb, Gwinnett, and Cobb County. And in fact, in DeKalb County, there's a bonus day of early voting on Wednesday, November 23rd. So it's a very short time frame. Probably not a great time to think about voting absentee. If at all possible, vote early. If you have to vote absentee, obviously it's available, but it should be really something that's done only if it's absolutely necessary. So that's the situation in Georgia. The bottom line is that the work you're doing with us and with others is of enormous importance, and we very much appreciate it. We have with us tonight someone that very, very privileged to have with us, because this is a woman who's been on the front lines with respect to grassroots organizing in Atlanta for over a decade. Valerie Habeuf, who is, among other things, a good friend of mine, a longtime friend of mine, founded an organization called the Jewish Democratic Women's Salon in 2012, along with Joni Shubin. And since that time, Valerie has been fighting hard to make sure that Democrats get elected, by the way, not just in federal, national positions, but also up and down the ballot in Georgia, which, as we know now, is in many ways just, if not more important. So it's really a pleasure and a privilege to have with us tonight Valerie Habeuf, and it's my special pleasure to introduce her to you now. Valerie.
Helps when I unmute. Thank you, Michael. We have, in fact, been working in Georgia now for 10 years. And so I would say we started in outrage 10 years ago, and 10 years later, we're still in outrage. Our focus, as you said, was always on local politics, because that's where we believed we could make the biggest difference. Our goal has always been to get Jewish women gathered together. The idea of a salon was that we would have big ideas in the back room, but now we're a large group. We're too big for anybody's salon. But the idea was that we could be difference makers. And so, you know, one of the things I want to say to everyone on this call tonight is, by being here, your very presence makes you a difference maker. This election throughout the country has been about relational voting, about the idea that voting is, you know, as Jews, we really believe that voting is how we exercise our responsibilities as a citizen. But it takes more than just voting. It takes voting and. Your presence here tonight is the and. Your presence, your willingness to reach out to our Georgia voters and encourage them to show up at our election, that's a big part of relational voting. As you talk to them, we want you to share with them not just that they're going to show up at the polls, but what will their and be? What else will they do? The other thing they can do is when they show up, they can bring everyone they know. They can bring their friends, they can bring their families, they can talk up the election, they can make sure that everyone understands that this was a tough election in Georgia. We experienced a lot of defeat. Every single one of our statewide candidates lost. This is our chance to make up for it. This will be a profoundly close election. It was profoundly close on November 8th, and it will likely be close again. There's a lot we could unpack about why it's so close, why we wish it wasn't the case, but we literally need every single Democrat to stand up and be counted. So your responsibility tonight could not be greater. Thank you again, everyone, for showing up. And I want to turn it over to the calling because that's what we're here to do.
Valerie, thanks. And thanks for all you do. Thanks for Jewish Democratic Women's Salon. It's made a huge difference in Georgia and in Atlanta. We thank you. And we thank you for partnering with us at JDCA. It's meant a lot.